The Callisto Protocol isn't revolutionary by any means. If you've played Dead Space, this is going to be very similar, but that's not necessarily a bad thing either. So while the gameplay is very similar to Dead Space, I do feel like this game does a better job with combining melee guns and the gravity gloves in a way that complement each other. You'll dodge an attack, swing a few times, get a prompt to do a quick draw shoot on them in the face, and then you can continue your melee combo. It's really satisfying and very simple. The trick is that enemy variety slowly ramps up as you progress through the game, and some situations will have multiple enemies coming at you at once. And even further into the game, enemies start getting these tentacles on them, and if you ignore that enemy for too long, they'll actually mutate into a stronger enemy. The problem is that Callisto Protocol can't seem to decide if it wants to be Resident Evil or be Call of Duty, with throwing like tons of enemies at you and just being bullet sponges. Like at the beginning of the game, it's solid. It's very slow paced, and you'll smack everything you see, saving as much ammo as you can for harder encounters. But later on, the game throws bundles of enemies at you, which forces you to stand in a corner and shoot all of them before they can reach you. Now, this isn't necessarily as bad as I'm making it out to be, but the problem is that you're just gonna have such an overabundance of ammo that I never felt pressured into a situation where I had to decide whether I would shoot or not. On the contrary, I had to fight against my survival game instincts and realize that I have so much bullets that I should just shoot everything I come across, which in turn kind of trivializes the combat because now suddenly you're not relying on the cool melee system. Now, I know that this argument kind of seems stupid because it's a shooting game. Of course, I'm going to end up shooting my guns, but this is all leading up to one of my biggest issues with the game, which was the inventory management. So at the beginning of the game, you start with only 6 inventory slots, which does end up expanding later on in the story. I think that this is the point because you're trying to decide, okay, well, what's more valuable, taking the treasure or taking the ammo? But to me, it was always a very simple choice of take the treasure item because the money in the game will literally upgrade all of your weapons, which in tandem means that you're dealing more damage and thus you're saving even more ammunition because you're using less to defeat your enemies. On top of that, any weapon schematics that you get will allow you to craft new guns, which is cool, but unfortunately each gun in the game has its own distinct ammo type, which means that as soon as you craft a new weapon, its ammo can start showing up in the loot pool, thus clogging up your inventory. Now, another minor gripe of mine is that there's no map in the game or no waypoint telling you where to go, which is perfectly fine, but the problem is that with this game being as linear as it is, sometimes there will be an alternative route that will lead to a supply room. And so there's a part of me that kind of wishes these alternate paths were a little bit more distinct, because half the time I'll go down a pathway thinking it's going to a supply room, and then it turns out that it's progressing through the story and I have to backtrack. The story in the game is fine. It's pretty forgettable, but it wasn't bad either. The main character was pretty cool, but you'll be separated from your companions a little too often. It's like, hey, we both need to help each other and fight for survival. Oh no, let's separate. Or they'll even have characters where, oh, hey, I don't trust you, and then 2 seconds later they're your best friend and your main character is just kind of like, okay, I accept this. Another minor complaint of mine is that there are some really annoying animations sometimes. I'm not talking about the motion capture of the actors or the characters or anything. I'm talking about these parts where you're crawling through a vent or shimmying between 2 pillars. It happens way too often and your character just moves too slowly. I think these are loading screens for old gen hardware, but it's a shame that they're still in the most modern versions of this game. Now, I know at this point it's starting to sound like I hate the game, but on the contrary, I actually really enjoyed my time with Callisto Protocol. A lot of these issues were just kind of minor complaints in the face of the bigger problems. The most obvious issue is the performance. This game is a horrible PC port with tons of stutters and frame rate dips. I've heard it runs better on consoles, but for PC anyways, I've got a very beefy computer and a 3090, and I'm still running into issues on medium settings. There was a day one patch that definitely helped, but not much. It's very, very immersion breaking when I die and the game crashes to desktop. Another thing that I wasn't a big fan of was the stealth or sneaking in this game. All you really do is crouch walk behind an enemy, and if it doesn't see you, you press E behind it and it dies. This was a simple enough mechanic that was fine and didn't really need to be fleshed out, except when you end up getting into the mines. See, this area introduces blind enemies who attack when they hear you, which sounds really cool in theory, but somebody on the dev team really liked this enemy and copy and pasted like 50 of them between you and your objective. And crouch walking behind 50 different enemies and pressing E on them to win is not my idea of a good time. I preferred the clickers in Last of Us because at least with them you could lure them out of your way and they were really deadly. With the enemies in Callisto Protocol, it's either you sneak up behind all of them and press E, or you just go into a corner, shoot your gun, everything aggroes towards you and you clean house. My last major complaint with this game is that there are certain features that are missing from the game right now, like New Game Plus and a bunch of other things. The developers did confirm that they'll be adding New Game Plus as well as all of these other features, but I hate how games nowadays will just slowly drip out content that should be there day one, all because they want to try and keep player retention. Like by the time New Game Plus is added, I'll be playing something else and I won't care anymore. Aside from my complaints, I can still easily recommend the Callisto Protocol, but I would have to give it like a 3 out of 5 just because of the lack of optimization. If this game ended up coming out day one and ran like butter, then I would probably give it a 4 out of 5 instead. But the lack of optimization is inexcusable and it really hurts trying to get yourself immersed in the game to have stuttering and stuff like this. The main critique that I'm seeing so many people say about Callisto Protocol is that it's just more Dead Space, but I think everyone's forgetting how innovative Dead Space was when it first came out. There's not really much they can do to make this formula more impactful. But on the flip side, I can totally understand people that might be hesitant to getting Callisto Protocol, especially with the Dead Space remake coming out in a month.